access to short, informative conversations on a variety of topics that we think are relevant for organizations and individuals dedicated to working with and learning more about environmental activism, the experiences of climate and environmental defenders, and the nature and drivers of the threats that these and other activists face in the context of a shrinking civic space. These sessions are presented by Asuntos del Sur in collaboration with the Knowledge Alliance for Environmental Defenders, CALIDE. CALIDE, a worldwide community of practice dedicated to exchanging knowledge and creating common strategies of communication and action to help environmental activists better confront the global climate emergency. CALIDE exists thanks to the generous support of IDRC in Canada. Today, I have the pleasure to speak with two experts on data security. As many will recognize, carrying out research projects, and especially data collection, responsibly and ethically can be quite fraught in situations where communities face different types of threats due to their commitment to defending the environment. One major challenge is how conversations with these communities may be carried out and preserved, such that community leaders, members, and activists are protected from any potential harm. Today, our goal is to address some of these challenges to undertaking data collection and data safekeeping in an ethical and responsible way. Our experts may also present some strategies that can be useful for keeping data, and more importantly, for keeping the communities from which the data emerged safe. We will be speaking today with Maja Kraljic, a senior technical officer at Association for Progressive Communications, ABC. Maja has a background in web development, digital marketing, and a Master of Science in Electronic Publishing. Passionate about open source, feminist internet activism, and creative coding, she explores ways to queer the code and build more inclusive digital spaces. Her work centers on co-creating private, safer, and empowering online environments for marginalized communities. We also have Agustina Bricio, who is an advocate for public policies that harness ICTs to promote inclusion. She holds a law degree and a master's in public policy. With over a decade of experience in digital policy and regulation, she has worked on telecommunications, cybersecurity, and AI in the public sector and in international organizations. As an MPA candidate on digital technologies and policy and a board member of ESOC Argentina, she works to bring the Global South into key digital policy discussions and to promote a more equitable digital ecosystem. It's really a pleasure for me to speak with both of you today. I want to get started with a somewhat more open introductory question. I'd like each of you to tell us what data security means to you. And I'm happy to start with Maja, if you would.
Well, thank you, Jen. The data security. For me, data security has multiple layers. I think the first one that I think about when I'm thinking about data security is this personal data security, right? Because we are generating many things. We are taking photos, we are making videos, we also have passwords, some personal information that we don't really want to share with the whole world. It's ours, right? We want to kind of keep it close to us. But we also have various devices. It's not just laptop, it's also phone, and we have watches, we have, external disks. There are many, many devices that we need to think about when we think about our data, where is it saved, right? And I'm always thinking what does it make it safe, actually? And who can access them? Because, maybe it's here on my desk, but who has access to the desk? Who can take it, right? Who can see what is on the device? There are various things that I can do to make them safer, to protect them. Because, many things need protection. We just don't put them up in the streets and see who takes them, right? We want to make sure that it's over for our eyes or for the eyes of people who we decide that we want to share it with. And then there's lots of data that we are generating without even knowing about it. Just like we go outside and maybe GPS tracker is on and this GPS location is shared. We don't know with whom exactly, where is it saved. When we browse the internet, also, like we have no idea where the data is going. Who knows what we are browsing? Is it only our internet service provider, or is there somebody else behind it, right? There's also lots of video surveillance that also collects data that we have no idea what is going on with. And lots of data is also used for advertising, for suggesting us like which product to buy, right? So there's always some data behind it that we might not even know that is generated. And on the organizational level, if I look from yet another perspective, as we are working a lot of times with activists, with human rights organizations, we also need to ensure that this collection of data doesn't put anyone in danger, in additional danger. Because actually it's not just data, it's people that is behind this data, or this data affects people. So we need to make sure that we think in let's say, bigger terms here. And yeah, learning how to protect ourselves, not just us as people, but as a community, I think is really important. Also, just understanding how technology works. What are the steps included there, and also how encryption works, because probably we will get back to the encryption later with the tools and everything. Many times the encryption is the answer, but it's also a very complex term, right? A very complex thing to teach somebody how it really works and how to use it. And I think it's quite complicated. So when I think about data security, for me, the most important things are or the questions are: who collects the data? Did I give consent? How or where is this data saved? And can I delete it? Can I request deletion of it? So yeah, this is in short, what does the data security mean to me?
Great. Thank you so much. Agustina?
Yes, thank you, Jen. As Maya was pointing out, when I think about data security, I also think it in layers. Actually, but I have a physical layer and maybe a different layer that covers actually the privacy layer and what we can actually do to manage our privacy online, and how we deal with all this data that, as Maya pointed out, actually is being collected all the time, even if we are aware of it or not. And that goes to a key point, which is the knowledge and the awareness gap we have sometimes while using technologies. While making this difference, I think that data security, especially for global Southern organizations and individuals, and especially for activists, is not about just thinking about a personal privacy, but it is often also related to how to address and to gatekeep the political resistance we are using sometimes in digital spaces. So to me, it's a topic we really need to advocate for, to research, to build, and also to discuss in every single layer we can, especially in grassroots organizations. Because in many countries that we are all aware of, activists, journalists, and community leaders also are facing numerous risks of surveillance, doxing, and now even state-sponsored cyber attacks. So governments, as Maya was pointing out, usually have a massive data collection by threatening the national security, and yet in practice this often leads to suppressing dissent, criminalizing of opposition voices, and sometimes it's over an excessive control of the civic space we have online and offline too. And I think that when we think about the infrastructure layer and the platforms, we know they are largely controlled by foreign corporations or governments in some points, it depends. And this raises a lot of questions about sovereignty, not only as in a national perspective, but also in sovereignty of our data as individuals. And I think that the lack of strong legal frameworks and enforcement mechanisms for data protection in many countries basically exacerbates these vulnerabilities, leaving individuals and organizations, especially activist organizations, exposed to a numerous of misuse of their personal information, often put them into an extra danger layer. So I think in many cases we see that governments have this dual role in security. They are like guaranteeing our security, but also using surveillance mechanisms that actually tend to violate our digital rights, maybe are not digital rights. Tech companies, especially corporations, tend to prioritize security features for wealthier markets that also many times leave us the low income or the non-English speaker users with not necessary protections or tools that are easily incorporated or used. So I think that in this maybe not amazing scenario that we're navigating, civil society, NGOs, grassroots movements, and some digital rights organizations basically step up in order to fill these gaps, the knowledge gaps and the awareness gaps I was referring at the beginning, offering what I think is the most key thing in order to understand data security and privacy. That's actually training and advocating to strengthen digital security practice within marginalized communities specifically. So to me, data security is something that is in constant movement and transformation and requires us all to take a closer look at it.
That's really interesting. So both of you sort of are mentioning the multi-dimension sort of layered aspect of data security. I was struck by this idea of when someone feels they have, or an organization feels it has data security, it seems to be aligned with having sort of control over who gets to see what and when, right? And knowing that you have the autonomy and the knowledge to be able to exert that control. So there's a lot of knowledge, really sophisticated knowledge that you need to have in order to understand what kind of data are being potentially surveilled, what kind of data, who has access to the data, how they've accessed. So training does seem to be really key to this, and data literacy seems to be really key to this. Would you both sort of agree? Data literacy on the part of the individual and on the part of the organization?
Yeah, I would actually agree, because also when I look at APC, when anybody joins APC as a new staff, we have the whole curriculum basically they need to go through and to be on board. We have, lots of sessions, and there are some tools that we have decided this is like top-down approach, right? When organization decides what kind of tools work for this organization. And we spend quite a lot of time in training, because people who join also have different levels of knowledge about the topics, about the tools themselves, and we all need to work together. So it's not just individuals' responsibility. It's the whole organization, right? The whole community, and especially when working with activists, with organizations. We need to also extend these practices outside, right, to make sure that everybody is safe. So yeah, there's a lot of training, lots of learning, but also not just learning, like I mentioned, from top down, but also co-learning, let's say, learning from each other, right? Because also tools are changing. We need to keep our knowledge updated all the time, and making sure that also practices change if there is a need.
Yeah, just building up on what Maya pointed out. I think that this is also related to try to understand privacy and security as a communitarian thing or a communal thing, because we usually, sorry if I'm going to put my lawyer hat on, but from a legal perspective, we have always addressed privacy as an individual right and as something that every individual must exercise properly in order to have its property away from the interference of the state. But actually we are realizing that in the digital space, privacy needs to have a collective approach, because we cannot build privacy from each individual. So this requires to have an approach to data security that also recognizes that the risks are shared. We are all in front of the same violations to security and collection of data. So I think that in societies where there is a lot of collective mobilization, it plays a critical role to shift how we understand data security, to try to reinforce the fact that we need to build it as a group, as a collective, in a really horizontal way. So here I would like to share a really nice experience we had last year within Argentina. Actually, we developed it with from Asuntos del Sur, ISOC, and Soldati Conectada, which was actually within a project that's called Replicando Conexiones, in which we are like fostering the deployment of community networks that are actually a way to provide internet to a community that is also like driven by the community. So the notion of being connected has like a different layer. And during this amazing project, we really put a lot of energy in the capacity building component, not only on the deployment of networks, but also how to manage security from a network perspective, but also for all the individuals, our users of that network, after all, so they can keep safe online and that then build like a general collective notion of how to stay safe, as Maya was pointing in the beginning, not only keeping your devices safe, your data safe, but also trying to think as groups, especially for vulnerable groups like women and children. So I think that the capacity building and the training is a constant process that really needs to be strengthened, especially from our perspectives.
So this is a really great point. This leads us into sort of what my next question was. And actually there's a comment in amongst people who are watching on YouTube that it's really great to think about data security as a collective agenda, as being something that's sort of a collective goal. And, you know, as more of an academic, as somebody who works in more academic circles, and, you know, we're just starting to integrate this notion that in addition to protecting our data, we also have to protect the people. It's crazy that it's the 21st century, you know, 2025, and we're just starting to think that maybe we also need to think about the people who share of themselves, give of themselves, their time, their energy, and even collaborate with them in terms of what kind of data we want to look at, what's important and what's relevant to them, and incorporating that into our work. And so it seems like we might want to think about a more communal approach to data security as well. So one question I might want to ask is, how can we approach data security with an ethics of care with the communities that you're working with on the ground? I mean, the example you gave, Agus, was a really good one of this, right?
Yes. So I was pointing out, okay, Replicando Conexiones, it's a really amazing project that actually tries to integrate all this vision on how to address security, how to address vulnerable communities, and to make them part of the decision-making process, not just a passive user that's receiving.
A recipient, right.
Exactly. But I think that when it comes to the ethical aspects that you were pointing out, then I think that security we have to step it aside from the technical problem. It's not a technical solution. It has also an ethical layer, especially when you're working with grassroots organizations. And I think that in the past, many international development projects or organizations have followed like an extractive model of data collection, especially when it comes to research. And actually, communities are asked to just provide information for research purposes or to build a policy or whatever. And there is not a lot of information on how that data is going to be treated and managed. And so communities are not necessarily aware of what is going to happen with their information.
Right.
And I think in some points, especially when it comes to informing policy decisions or trying to have a research or something, the same communities not necessarily aware of the benefits it will provide to them. So I think that a more ethical approach in data security must keep in mind that we are working with people. So we need to reinforce the principle of informed consent, ensuring that basically individuals and groups understand what is going to happen with the data, where is it going to be stored, where is it going to be useful, who is it going to be shared with. And I think that researchers and organizations must really adopt a data minimization practices, collecting only the necessary information for the given purpose. And I think that to reinforce this, transparency and accountability cannot be overstated. So I think organizations must really, really establish clear security protocols and communicate them to communities, and also provide access to their own data, and rather than keeping it in databases that are not necessarily. So I think that from our prior experience, it has become evident that grassroots organizations and activists really need more than just tools. They need to be really informed, and they really need to understand what's happening. So this is I have to reinforce that investing in the training and the education ensures that basically digital security becomes an integrated practice in not just an afterthought to say, okay, how can we manage this? We didn't thought about that. So I think that this is part of the process of reminding ourselves that data security is not just for the technical community or for the engineers. Basically, whoever's working with any organization must take it into consideration and incorporate it in methodology or protocol.
I totally agree with you, Agustina, about all the points that you said. I could reiterate them again. I think this co-developing of security protocols is essential with communities and considering their specific needs, not just coming into the community and just, commanding where we want to go and how to do it, because we don't know about all the context and all the issues that people are facing, of course. I think it's also super important that we make sure that anonymization techniques are used, that the data is encrypted, whatever we collect, that it's properly treated. And that also data is deleted after the project ends, right? We have actually one project where we were co-creating basically the whole digital environment. We didn't want to host anything on corporate servers, so we wouldn't even use Zoom, for example, like we are using it now. We would go to Big Blue Button and host it on our own servers that are encrypted, that are under the community's control, right? Yeah. And then also we had Nextcloud, for example, for all the files. We had Mattermost for the communication. So everything was under the control of the community, and every decision that was made jointly, right? It wasn't made by one person. And it really showed how also the events that were held under that project were conducted differently, right? There was this advisory board that was deciding who will be the participant, what kind of topics we will do. So it kind of trickles down to many other areas. It's not just infrastructure then anymore, but it's how the whole environment is built and co-created. So I think it's very important to start. At some point, it can be data security, right? But then to expand it also to other things.
So that's really interesting, this notion of collaboratively producing security protocols. I think it's probably really helpful too, because it incentivizes the communities on the ground to really learn and absorb and take it with them after APC or other organizations inevitably leave, right? So this data security is not something that ends, even when a project ends, it's something that sort of continues. I want to ask you both, so one potential tool that can be helpful in empowering communities to treat their data securely would be to co-create these sort of security protocols. What other tools might be useful for thinking about collecting data safely, storing data safely, deleting data safely, which is itself an issue, as I believe Maya brought up? What are some tools that can be helpful from your own experiences?
Well, when I do these data security or digital security trainings, we have like a list of tools, and it's too much. Even if the training is for 1 week, it's just like information after information, tool after tool, setting after setting, and it's just like too much. And I sometimes wonder after a week, how many of these tools will actually be used by the community later on, right? Because in a week, you cannot incorporate everything. You cannot encrypt your disk and start using, encrypted email, and then also using. And yet,
a week in some ways is kind of a luxury. That's in some ways it's a lot of time, but it's even
sometimes
still.
It's just a day. Yeah, true.
Exactly.
But there are lots of tools, and I always approach this from the point of view. Okay, if there were just like one or maybe two tools that the community would actually adopt at the end, which tools would that be, right? So sometimes if you are collecting data and maybe you're not very advanced user and you just want to protect it, maybe it's good enough to just have a password manager which is encrypted and put the file there, and the file is encrypted and you're safe if you know the password, of course, to access the database, right? because maybe you don't even need all the other steps that are, of course, more secure, but still, maybe just one layer of protection is good enough in that particular situation, right? We don't need to spend 20 years learning. But of course, we love to do it all, right? So we also need to acknowledge that this is learning. So maybe 2 tools this week, 3 tools maybe next month, and trying to incorporate it in life and practice it inside of the community, right?
Sort of an overtime approach to, we'll start with basic things, then move on as challenges emerge.
Yeah, I think it's a really good point you're making, Maya, because sometimes when I think about security, it's like, okay, we want to cover all of this, and sometimes starting with baby steps is the best. So that's why I think maybe like awareness campaigns and capacity building are more than necessary, because once we start acknowledging what little actions we can take in order to guarantee our privacy and to keep our data safe, everything is better than nothing. So I think that especially when thinking about tools, we usually try to address, okay, what products can I buy, or what can I incorporate to my devices to feel better? And a lot of these solutions, aside of many of them being expensive or not very easily for the user, usually make a lot of assumptions of connectivity, of medium velocity or awareness, and usually we don't have that access. So we tend to always choose free services, and we all end up like using WhatsApp and Facebook, and sorry for saying this, the names, but they are actually the default communications that we choose to affordability. So in these cases, we end up like using a trade-off with privacy and security for not. Okay, we say if we can't buy like a proper tool, we're not going to do anything. So we can just use WhatsApp. And I think there are a lot of actions that can be taken. There are many like encryption tools, as Maya was saying, that are open source and free, like Cryptpad, OnionShare, that basically allow you to have a secure maybe file sharing to start, not necessarily to encrypt a server or something. And I think that going back to the research thing and the data collection, I think there are like many actions that can be taken, especially now that we have like synthetic data, which actually enables researchers to conduct analysis without necessarily having to take information from people and expose.
Can you tell us what synthetic data are?
Yeah, synthetic data is like a made up data that actually emulates real data, but it's not necessarily related to a person. This is used a lot now for AI training models. And it has some ethical things that we are still covering, if it's ethical or not to use this synthetic data, but it certainly reinforces this anonymity in data collection, especially for research purposes. I'm going to just leave it narrow to this, not to train these massive AI models that are using us. For research purposes, this is a really good alternative in order to when you're working with organizations. And I think that there are like a different tools. I really like ObscuraCam. That's actually a plugin you use, and it removes some metadata when sharing photos. This thing that Maya was pointing out at the first thing. Sometimes we share a picture. We have no idea all the information we are sharing in a picture related to us and to many other people that are necessary in information. So I think that taking this privacy filter in order to what we're doing online is also it's a really nice first step in order to do some awareness efforts maybe on this privacy. So sometimes the best tools, buying like the best server or 40 or whatever, are not effective if the individual is not aware of the risks. So I think we have to start thinking security from a human perspective, from a personal perspective, and not necessarily as being technologically dependent, because security starts from us. We don't need to buy something to guarantee it. So I think that we should like start thinking of digital security as a priority too in our agendas.
Great. That's really interesting. So there was a lot of information there. I'm struck by this idea that for somebody who doesn't fully understand all of the tools that are available, who if somebody says to me, for example, well, this has been encrypted, I don't have the tools to really verify that that's the case. I just sort of have to trust, right? It's like when somebody fixes my car, they tell me if I fixed my car, but I don't really know if they fixed my car, right? So what are some of the challenges to increasing data literacy just amongst the general population? If this is really something that we need to take on, not for specific projects, not for, specific periods of time, but if this is like a living, breathing thing, like what are challenges? Maybe that's one of the challenges, the living, breathing thing, right? But how can we just increase data literacy as an approach to sort of interacting in this hybrid world that we live in?
I would agree. There are lots of challenges because tech is complex and it's evolving, and it's like it's becoming a big beast that is harder and harder to understand, right? I think the main thing that we can do is to make the learning fun. At least that's what we are doing in APC. We try to do it to try to incorporate games in all these sessions. For example, there are internet shutdowns, right? And we created a game where people can compete among each other on who will get the best answer and most points. And it makes the whole engagement fun. And people, of course, we usually learn better when we are engaged and we are having good time, right? And we're trying to make sure that all these topics become more familiar and that people can see where the problem is, that they get an explanation. They can be more they can more freely also ask questions, because sometimes in the learning experience you're like, okay, I'm learning here, I'm just like quiet and trying to remember. But if I'm engaged, it makes things more fun. And another activity that we did that was also super fun was like, how can we have safer sexting on, let's say, Signal? Because if you figure out how to make that kind of information safer, then you can apply to many other fields, from personal to organizational, and just having something engaging, a topic that is engaging to learn. I think it helps a lot. And we can apply this kind of fun stuff to many things, and I think it's much easier for everybody to participate.
Yeah, I really like that. I think the key part of incorporating security is like bridging taboo discussions that we usually have in society, because this is happening. So instead of like being in denial of some reality, so try to focus, okay, we need to protect our devices. Yeah, but we also need to do a lot of other things in the digital sphere, feeling safe and knowing that whatever we're sharing with someone will end up just there and not in several places. I really like the gaming strategy. I think this is key, because one of the most complicated things, and maybe it's not properly addressed, is covering security in the digital realm since an early stage. So we need to think about how to work with kids, basically, so that when they start using devices and digital media, they are already aware of, okay, we need to, this may be a liability, I cannot share this, especially with all the threats we're seeing that are actually addressing kids specifically online. And the fact that we cannot just ban internet, because it is part of our reality now, and it's going to be an even bigger part of the reality of a future generation. So we need to think about really ludic strategies so that kids actually incorporate security early than we did, probably after not being like digital natives. So I think that using that kind of strategy and thinking different educational initiatives for specific groups, because we cannot address with the same campaign kids, adults, and the elder, because they face different risks, because they do different activities online. But when we're thinking about grassroots organizations, we need to think about a different approach. We cannot like use a national campaign to cover everybody. We need to think about, okay, what are the specific challenges that each group is facing, and we need to make it like fun and easy. It's as easy as possible, because this is not a field that's just for engineers. I'm a lawyer. I come from the social sciences, and I think that we all need to be involved with this, because otherwise we're just only adopting things. We end up like being passive users of something that is covering. Right. Yeah, exactly. So I think that's one of the key parts. I really like the games. I think that by games you actually learn better.
Well, so I want to sort of close here. This has been a really fascinating conversation, and just ask you both sort of a closing question. If you have any other words of advice or strategies to recommend to organizations who may be endeavoring to work with communities on the ground to sort of secure data and empower those communities to be able to do that for themselves. Any other words of advice you might have that we haven't already discussed? You covered it all.
No, I think we covered a lot, but I think that
you did. We did.
We need to reinforce that basically security is not a luxury. It's something that should be part of every discussion in every layer of communities. And I really think that we should start to seize some benefits that anonymity provides online in order to address it properly, and try to think about in which strategy we can protect people that are actually chase or suffer different threats in line. But that's like a general thing, and just to not be overconfident of technology. The fact that we are using privacy enhancing technologies, encryption or whatever, doesn't mean that we don't have to, we can just relax and say, okay, I'm secure because this is encrypted, or I'm secure because I have this amazing device. The human factor is still important. So we really need to incorporate security and not just expect the technology to keep us safe online.
Or this assumption that I'm secure because I live in a government, I live in a democracy where I don't feel that I'm being surveilled in any way. All of these assumptions about who may or may not want our data and what they may use it for, and how it may end up in other hands, or that governments change and regimes change, Yeah, that's a really
exactly.
Or you might go traveling, to another country, and the laws are different there, so you might get surprised even at the airport.
Right, that's true. So I really appreciate this idea, because I was just thinking, with how different generations of people need different sort of levels of training, because the younger generations may be digital natives, but they may be much more ignorant or less aware or naive about sort of the dangers that lurk behind that. And older generations may be more concerned and conservative about sharing data, but I certainly feel overwhelmed with sort of what I would need to do in order to feel like I'm securing myself. But you have both made it clear that with a couple of steps, doing a couple of things, it is possible to live more securely. And I want to just ask afterwards, I'm going to follow up, and maybe some of the tools that you've referenced in this conversation, and maybe you have some sites on your websites, and we can post them underneath the video when we post this online. I think that would be really helpful. Some of the strategies you've raised, tools you've identified, the programs that you've been a part of. So that will be really helpful, I think, for those who will be watching this video in the future. And I just really want to thank you both for your time, for your expertise, and for making this a really thoughtful and fun conversation.
Thank you. Thank you for the invitation.
Thank you.
Wonderful.
Take good care.